Hello, welcome to Only for Your Ears and today's episode 26, Ib and Little Christina, which I've renamed as The Bittersweet Taste of Unrequited Love. First, let's start off with the structure. We'll start with the summary, which will highlight the most important points where I'll digress. Then, we'll continue with my critical review of how this fairy tale plays in today's society. And the last will be the trigger points. There are trigger points and some not so good trigger points. We'll take a look at both. Thank you. Let's begin with the bittersweet taste of unrequited love. Ib and Little Christina is a fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen that tells the story of two childhood friends who eventually fall in love. Ib is a poor boy living with his widowed father in a small cottage, while little Christina is a girl from a more affluent family living nearby. I digress. This sounds like two opposites attracted to each other. Well, at least from their backgrounds. Despite their different social backgrounds, the two children form a strong bond and spend their days playing together. I digress. These two different halves make a whole. It's almost a you completely moment. The story revolves around two children, Ib and Christina, who grow up as neighbors and develop a strong bond when a mysterious gypsy woman visits Ib. She grants him three wishes over time. The children grow up, and Christina falls in love with John, a prosperous innkeeper. Although heartbroken, Ib stays loyal and gives her up to John. I digress. This demonstrates the merits of Ib's true love for Christina and a maturity too. Reflection. Selfless love and sacrifice. Ib's willingness to give up his own happiness for Christina, while being a prime example of selfless love. He supports her choices, even when they lead her away from him. The story highlights the importance of putting others' happiness before our own and embracing sacrifice as a form of love. I digress. Ib's love for Christina isn't ego driven, which is refreshing. As they grow older, their friendship turns into love. However, Christina's family moves away and the two young lovers are separated. Years later, Ib saves enough money to visit Christina and proposes marriage. I digress. His determination is very attractive. When he finally reaches her, he discovers that she is already engaged to another man. Heartbroken, Ib returns home and tries to move on with his life. I digress. He accepts his fate for now, maturity, the consequence. 7 years later, Christina's marriage proves to be unhappy and she dies in poverty. The gypsy woman then brings Christina's daughter, also named Christina, to Ib. I digress. The gypsy knew how the story would play out. That's why she brings her daughter to Ib, and they live happily together. Reflection. Fate and destiny. The involvement of the gypsy woman who grants Ib three wishes introduces an element of fate and destiny into the story. I digress. This wise woman approaches Ib because she knows the fate of these two children, but most importantly, shows how Ib's heart. This shows that sometimes, despite our best efforts and intentions, life has its own path planned for us, and we may not be able to control the outcome. One day, he or Ib meets a beautiful woman and her young daughter, who are both in need of help. Ib takes them in and they live together as a family. Years later, Christina's husband dies, leaving her penniless. I digress. Well, she did marry a man that wasn't very responsible. She returns to her childhood home where Ib and the woman he took in now reside. As fate would have it, the young daughter of the woman Ib had helped turns out to be Christina's own daughter, who she had left in care of a woman when her husband died. I digress. This implies that little Christina was always supposed to have their child with Ib. Christina had hoped that her daughter would have a better life away from the impoverished circumstances. Her impoverished circumstances. Reflection. The consequences of choices, I should say. The tale emphasizes the importance of the choices we make in life as they shape our future. Christina's decision to marry John ultimately leads her to unhappiness and, unfortunately, an early death, illustrating that our choices can have long lasting consequences. I digress. This is so true that that's why the process of making any decision has to be well thought out. Christina and Ib reconnect, and despite the years of separation and hardship, their love for each other remains strong. I digress. First love bonds are very hard to break. They decide to spend the rest of their lives together, joined by the daughter who reunites them. I digress. I would have loved for this to be a true ending, the true ending to this story, even though it has many versions. But as I previously said, there are many versions to this tale. In the end, Ib, Christina, and the young girl form form a loving, supportive family, demonstrating that true love can endure even the most challenging circumstances and time apart. I digress. Distance makes the heart grow fonder. The story of Ib and little Christina is a heartwarming tale of love, friendship, and the strength of the human spirit to face adversity. Overall, Ib and Little Christina is a poignant story that explores themes of love, sacrifice, fate, destiny, and the power of choice. It serves as a reminder that we must be mindful of decisions we make and appreciate the selfless acts of love others may show us. This is very true, people. Now for my review on how this fairy tale plays in today's society. Well, when I first read this story, I found myself thinking of West Side Story, The Titanic, and scenes from Jerry Maguire. So let's continue with my review. Ib and Little Christina serves as a powerful warning concerning the decisions we make in our lives. Every breath we take until the day we pass to the other side. Our daily lives are the schools of life. Unfortunately, as informative as the written word may be, it doesn't always provide us with wisdom. And the gypsy provide us with wisdom. The gypsy woman that appears in the story has what she has is the wisdom. She actually foretells the destiny of what will happen to the two young lovebirds in this fairy tale. Ib and little Christina tells the story of two children that develop a very strong bond for each other that lasts a lifetime. Ib's from what you call the wrong side of the tracks because his family is poor, whereas little Christina comes from an affluent family. However, the two become inseparable, and I believe really need each other, but not in a codependent way. However, they both have something the other one needs, a you complete me moment. There are direct parallels from this fairy tale that reflects today's reality. Let's begin with the sentences from the summary to frame the review. I digress. This sounds like two opposites attracted to each other. Well, at least from their background, despite their different social backgrounds. The two children form a strong bond and spend their days playing together. The idea of two people from diverse backgrounds being attracted to each other is still unusual but frequent in today's society between races, class, education, money, etc. In the Titanic, Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet play star-crossed lovers on this fated disaster. In 1912, Southampton, 17-year-old Rose DeWitt Bukata, her wealthy fiancé, Caldon Cal Hockley, and Rose's widowed mother, Ruth, board the Titanic. Ruth emphasizes that Rose marrying Cal will resolve the family financial problems and maintain their upper class status. Meanwhile, Jack Dawson, a poor young artist, wins a third class ticket on the Titanic in a poker game. After setting sail, Rose, distraught over her loveless engagement, climbs over the stern railing, intending to commit suicide. Jack coaxes her back onto the deck, and they develop a friendship. Jack soon admits that he has feelings for Rose. When Cal and Ruth object, When Cal and Ruth object, Rose rejects Jack's attentions, but returns to him after realizing she has fallen in love, of course. Let's skip forward a bit where selfless love and sacrifice is demonstrated. With the ship sinking, the crew prioritized women and children for evacuation. Rose finds and frees Jack, and they make it to the back of the deck where Cal and Jack urge Rose to board a lifeboat, intending to save himself. Cal lies that he will get Jack safely off the ship and wraps his overcoat around Rose. As her lifeboat is lowered, Rose, unable to abandon Jack, jumps back onto the ship. Cal grabs Lovejoy's pistol and chases Jack and Rose, but they escape. Cal realizes the necklace is still in the coat he gave Rose. He poses as a lost child's father to board the lifeboat. Anyway, in the end, Jack acts as a float to Rose, and she gets rescued while Jack floats away to the bottom of the sea. He risks his life for the woman he loved. Ib never lost his love for little Christina after they reconnected, and then he becomes the parent to Christina's daughter, whose name's also Christina. Okay, let's continue. Number 2, I digress. Ib's love for Christina isn't ego driven, which is refreshing. Thank goodness. West Side Story isn't quite the same as Romeo and Juliet as it's been made out to be, because Romeo and Juliet were impossibly in love and at a young, impressionable age. Inspired by William Shakespeare's play, Romeo and Juliet, the story is set in the mid 1950s in the Upper West Side of Manhattan in New York City, then a multiracial blue collar neighborhood. The musical explores the rivalry between the Jets and the Sharks, two teenage street gangs, different ethnic backgrounds. The Sharks, who are recent migrants from Puerto Rico, and the Jets, who are white, we vie for the dominance of the neighborhood. This is so typical, people, and it still exists today. I remember when I was in New York, and it was Koreans and Puerto Ricans doing the same thing. Vie for dominance of the neighborhood, and the police try to keep order. The young protagonist, Tony, a former member of the Jets and best friend of the gang leader, Riff, falls in love with Maria, the sister of Bernardo, the leader of the Sharks. The dark theme, sophisticated music, extended dance scenes, tragic love story, and the focus on the social problems marked a turning point in musical theatre. The racial component is a driving force, a tremendous threat, a tremendous th- threat to come from a place of hate and turn it into love, fear and resistance to change. This love has to be destroyed, and it is. I digress. Distance makes the heart grow fonder. The story of Ib and little Christina is a heartwarming tale of love, friendship, and the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. I'm reminded of situations in life where one half of the relationship takes the other for granted. And this is so true, as perfectly executed in Jerry Maguire. So, in the film Jerry Maguire, Jerry is so concentrated on building his career. He's been booted out of a multinational company where he was an agent for a sports agent for very successful players and some not so successful. And he's booted out of it because he writes mission statements. Well, he leaves, and a secretary in the building or in his office decides to come with him, and that is Renee Zellweger. So they form a sort of a partnership together, and she works for him. And he takes his only client left with him, which is an amateur player. So they work together and they go on very well. And he meets her adorable son. Well, what happens is that she begins to fall for him, but she doesn't want to show him that she falls for him because she wants to keep it professional. But then they see the amateur player and his wife, played by Regina King, and they're all smooching all over each other. Anyway, something happens. They get together, and it's incredible. They don't actually sleep together, but they sort of, you can see that they really like each other. But Jerry really likes the son. He doesn't like the mother as much. I mean, he likes Renée Zellweger's character, but he's not in love with her. He's really adores the son. He's in love with the son, and he is adorable. You do fall in love with him. and they try to have this relationship, and they get married, and you can see his hands are sweating, and he's just very tense because he does not want to really marry her, but he's doing it for the child. So what happens? The wife realizes that he doesn't love her, and so she says, "Look, let's spend some time apart." Well, they spend time apart, and he realizes that he misses her. He misses her so much. He misses the boy, but he also really misses her, and he realized how important she is to him. And so eventually he comes to her house where she's staying with her uh, sister, who is very negative about men at the moment, and she has a women's group. And he comes in and he says, "I've come to see you." And they walk towards each other, and she says, "You had me at hello. You had me at hello." And it's such a beautiful scene because it's not like one of these lovey-dovey scenes where, oh, we love each other from the beginning and all the way to the rest of our lives. He has to learn that he can't take her for granted. And in not taking her for granted and realizing that he missed her, that's when he really ends up falling in love with her. So that's it's a really wonderful story. And I think with uh, Ib and little Christina, there are some points that could be looked at where they're just taking it for granted, taking their love for granted. I think mainly more Christina than Ib, because Ib's love for her was always consistent. Okay, let's continue. Women he took in now reside at fate would have the young daughter of the woman Ib had helped turn out to be Christina's own daughter, who she had left in care of the woman when her husband died. I digress. This implies that little Christina was always supposed to be with Ib. Let's continue now with the trigger points. Number one, now with the trigger points, I believe that most of them are positive and not negative. It raises little Christina's daughter like his own, being the mother to her and the father. Well, this triggered me a little bit because it reminds me of my situation where I had to be the mother to my mother, and I also had to be the mother and the father to myself, and learn to be a mother and a father to my inner child. So that really triggered me a lot. I found myself still reflecting on why I feel so resentful. I still feel a little bit of resentful this, but I always find myself saying, look, your mother did not know how to be a mother. And so many people don't know how to be a mother. It's a learning process. It's a process. None of us, just because you have a baby, it doesn't mean that that you are perfect. Could be a perfect fit to be a mother. It is a day by day process, learning how to be how to be a parent, how to allow that child to organically grow in your presence while at the same time giving them some wisdom and some points so they can grow to maturity, giving them trust and security and being strict with them when it's necessary. I didn't have that. My mother didn't have that. So I did it, I had to do that for my mother, and then I had to learn how to do it for myself. The next point of the triggers, the transmute unforgiveness into love. Now, the point that I want to look at is where I digress. He accepts his fate for now. This is very important because he's mature. He's very mature for his age, and he sincerely really loves little Christina. And what I love about this is that he's able to just love her without feeling any kind of unforgiveness. Of course, he was rejected. Of course, he wanted to marry her. Of course, he wanted to hear her say yes. But he never got bitter and rigid. And you can tell that he never got bitter and rigid because as soon as he realized little Christina that was almost dying, and he realized, oh, that's the daughter, he immediately opened up his arms towards her and little Christina. There was no unforgiveness, no bitterness at all, even though it took a long time for him to be able to contact her, to see her. So I think that's a trigger that could have gone really bad and lasted for a long time, but didn't. It was transmuted. He really didn't experience unforgiveness, but he was sad. But he had so much love for Christina, it overpowered everything. True love is understanding. Number 3. I digress. Ib's love for Christina isn't ego driven, which is refreshing. Thank goodness. You know, so many. Ib could have really got upset with Christina and, being ego driven. When I say ego driven, driven by not just ego, but by his manliness, his need to physically show her that he loved her. And he never really needed to do that because he loved her on so many different levels. And there's so many times I've had this experience. There's so many times when you may say you're not ready, you don't want to have something right now, and they go off in a half. These men act like children. They go off in a half, and that's exactly when you know that they don't necessarily love you, but they're just frustrated that they can't have sex with you. And this is the real difference because love is not sex. Sex is part of showing someone that you love them. And that's important. That's part of that physical expression, the nurturing, the romance, everything. It's all encompassing. You have the emotions, you have the psychological, the intellect, you have the soul, you have the spirit, you have the physical, and you have the love coming together. And when that happens, it doesn't always happen, but when it does, it is miraculous. But a lot of times you just have good sex, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's not necessarily love. And a lot of times people confuse the two. And one of the things that I loved about Ib is that whether he had sex with little Christina or not, his love was so complete with for her within him that it didn't matter whether they had sex or not. Of course he wanted to have sex with her, but it wasn't the most important driving force. Now, those are the three triggers, and on the most part, most of them have been very positive. The first one is quite good. It's neutral, really. It's not negative and it's not positive. It's just kind of neutral. The second one is sort of neutral as well, and the third one is what I would call neutral. It has a little bit of both in it. Well, that's the episode 26 for today. And I'd like to say thank you very much for listening. Thank you for the people that have viewed. I'm in a different location now. I've moved back to Barcelona, but I'm still in touch with people all over the world. So I look forward to seeing you next week. Now, let me end with my usual expression. Healing is a lifelong lesson, blessing, and gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Healing is a lifelong lesson, blessing, and gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Please subscribe, give me a like, and share with your friends. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you and goodbye. Have a great weekend.